wanted to turn our attention to our final great two guests. Kerel Cooper is someone that I've had the privilege to know for more than a decade now. We've known the firm that he runs the show on marketing for LiveIntent since pretty much their beginning. LiveIntent is one of the sexy logos you will see if you go to prohaskaconsulting.com/IPL, which is our identity partners list that we started putting together in Q1 of this year and have made 4 updates to already, showing the 106 different firms that have either deterministic, probabilistic, and/or contextual identity solutions. LiveIntent's been at it though for a while and has had the genius move of starting in one of the most underserved areas, but most important in all of digital marketing, email. And if you don't know LiveIntent, obviously check them out and you'll hear from Kerel throughout why you should know more about them. And for Mr. Cooper himself, in addition to his great work that he's going to do here with Josh Groth of Square, I believe he'll announce and reiterate the brand name change to Block, but we'll see if that's official and has made it through from their CEO on down from last week's little news. But Kerel, you can hear with our other good friend Eric on Minority Report, a fantastic and important podcast that they've been doing for several years now, with fantastic guests and obviously very important topics, as you'll see. So without further ado, Kerel and Josh are ready. Mr. Cooper, take it away, please.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Great intro. Appreciate the great intro and appreciate Prohaska putting all of this together. Everyone out there listening, thanks for the conversation that Josh and I are going to have around balancing data creative as it relates to the future of identity attribution and measurement. But before we get into that, just again, just quick intros. Matt gave me a great intro already, but my name is Kerel Cooper, CMO at LiveIntent. For those of you who are not familiar with LiveIntent, we operate a people-based marketing platform that leverages the power of email to help publishers and advertisers acquire, retain, and monetize their audience. And I'm going to throw it over now to my great guest here, Josh, to do a quick intro on himself. Josh, take it away.
All right. My name is Josh Groth, and I'm the Vice President of Global Performance Marketing here at Block, working on the Square business now, which is a weird thing to say and get used to with the name change. But it's just great to be here. Just a little bit about me. I started out actually on the brand side of things, and I spent most of my lifetime on the paid and the performance side. And I spent a lot of that in e-commerce and D2C. And I had the awesome opportunity to kind of come over and bring that playbook over to Square and financial services. So really excited to be joining you today and talking about identity and measurements and pixels and all the above.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and jump right into the conversation. So obviously a lot going on in our space today. The conversation around third-party cookies, mail privacy protection, you name it, it's going on. And I think the way we target and reach our customers is obviously changing, right? And will continue to change in the months ahead. And part of that is sort of losing some of the signal that we've relied on for a very long time, right? And so with that in mind, how do you think about channel diversification? How do you think about it today, but also how are you thinking about it in the future as well, too?
I love this as a first question. It's actually kind of like 2 questions in one. I'm more like, what's the state of play right now with identity and tracking and measurement? And then what are those implications for the now what? So, to the first part, I think we have to accept the inevitable. Change with privacy and tracking has happened, will continue to happen, will continue to evolve. iOS 14.5 ripped that Band-Aid off. Then there was the CCPA, or California Consumer Privacy Act. But if you're looking at like reading the tea leaves of like the direction that things are going, there's something like a dozen different states that have similar legislation up that would be mimicking what California has done. So you can just infer that like more change is going to happen. And, you know, if you're being retrospective and lamenting about the way things were, that's, you know, one approach, but it doesn't really like do us any good. I think we're at that stage where you have to embrace like our new reality and figure out like what is that appropriate path forward. And that's where I've really seen that kind of like bifurcation of how people have been accepting of this change, where you do have like the majority of people who are talking about like, oh, I remember what CPAs were like, or I remember what my CPMs were like, and look at what's happened. You can also flip that on its head and look at it as an opportunity. And what I mean by that is privacy changes have like leveled the playing field for all advertisers. Like we're all in this together in terms of like figuring out like what are those next steps? What is the path forward? How do we now approach measurement and targeting? Are there different workarounds for pulling different types of levers like creative and things like that? So be opportunistic, because if you can figure out your ways to start, you know, reducing those media costs and improving performance again, while your competitors are kind of still stuck in a rut trying to figure out what's going on, well, then you've got a competitive advantage. And that's the way and the direction I'm trying to push my team. And I think what's interesting about this is if you kind of look at like digital marketing over the last like 10 or so years, it's kind of been easy, not in the fact that it's easy to implement the things that everyone is doing globally, but easy in the fact that if you wanted to connect all the dots from ad impression to conversion, you could do that. And it made it really easy to quantify the impact of every single dollar that you're spending in marketing. And I think what that led to is this overweighting and over-indexing on digital platforms that allowed for that, like Facebook and Google. And all of a sudden you went from having maybe a more balanced portfolio to leaning way more heavily and become more reliant on those channels where you could get access to that amazing signal. I mean, just look at every D2C brand that we've ever had. You know, companies with no brand awareness. You have a niche new product for a niche new industry, and you can go to Facebook, and the literal sales pitch I had when I was there was, we'll find the right person for you at the right time for the lowest possible cost. And like, it worked really well. And then those companies turned into massive, massive, massive companies. And it worked because you could lean on those algorithms. And I think now we're at this point in time where all of a sudden, like, it's not going to be so easy. It's going to change. You're going to have to figure out what your new tactics are, new approach to marketing and growth overall. And that's where that second part of your question comes in, which is, you know, channel diversification. The first question at the tip of everyone's tongue. I like to joke that channel diversification is usually like the shiny object syndrome, where people always want to go and stand up a new marketing channel. I think before figuring out like what new channel you want to move into, you kind of need to take stock of where you are and what are your blind spots and what are your current limitations. And then going forward, are those going to be exacerbated, or do you have a way to start mitigating that risk? So don't just go and stand up a new channel for the sake of a new channel. So my guess is that many of the people on this call, my old clients included, had a major overweighting in Facebook and Google. And it's not to say you shouldn't advertise there. It's to understand what are the nuances of those platforms and what have been the implications of the changes because of privacy. So a couple of things have popped up. Both of those channels are reliant on pixels. Second thing, they're both auction dynamics, which means growth is tricky. If you want to compete and like grow more, you're going to have diminishing returns. And the more competition there is, the higher those prices get. And the other thing we know is that generally the broader the audience, the broader the targeting, the cheaper the CPM, and the more granular you are, the more expensive that media is going to be. Simple math. Well, this actually like invites several real issues into your marketing mix. The first is, if your target audience was 10 million people, it's probably now 5, which means that your media prices are going up, which means more competition around that smaller audience, which means more price creep going up and up and up. If you looked at Facebook's Q2 earnings report, they talked about that 47% year-over-year increase in CPMs. That is an average. That means if you're a brand that is doing super broad targeting, you're probably not going to be as impacted as someone like a gaming company or a D2C company who's doing hyper targeted already, and now they're having to spend even more to be able to reach that same audience. So again, it doesn't mean you shouldn't advertise there. It just means you now have to think about what are those weaknesses, which is an auction-based dynamic and something that is dependent on a pixel, and how can you start diversifying your portfolio of channels that you're advertising on that don't have those same dependencies. So the two that come to mind, and the two that I lean in heavily on and advocate for and spend a lot of time talking about with my peers in the industry are streaming and OTT and direct mail. And there's a reason why these two always come to the top. The first is that streaming and OTT, from a tracking and a measurement standpoint, is generally done by IP address matchback, which is not a pixel. So right there, you're diversifying and mitigating risk because now you're thinking about two different ways to track an event. The other nice thing about IP address matchback is it's kind of a perfect closed loop. I can serve you, Kerel, an ad on any device in your home, whether it is your iPad, your phone, your laptop. And then I know that same IP address pings our website within a 5 or 10 minute window of that ad displaying. So it's not only a great closed loop, but it also accounts for cross-device functionality. So that's one reason why people are like leaning into streaming. And the second one is there has just been an absolute crazy boom in the amount of available impression share that you can buy and serve your ads against. And this is a large part, we saw this really tick up over the past 2 years of COVID, with more people spending more time at home and screen time ballooning. So the available impression share went from, kind of creeping up to jumping up 400 and something 15% over the last 2 years. That's incredible, because that's what you're really trying to account for. You're saying all right, I used to be able to spend X amount of millions of dollars on a Facebook or a Google. How do I make up for that? You need another sort of channel that can take on that sort of volume for you. That's one thing. The other thing too is streaming is not an auction. So growth is an easier path as you try to scale. Whereas if you're trying to go from spending $50,000 a day on Facebook to $500,000 a day in Facebook, that is incredibly difficult to maintain efficiency. I have done that. I don't wish that on anyone. It takes months of planning, lots of creative, great team. It's hard. But in streaming, if you can figure out the right creative with the right networks, with the right mix of durations for your spots, and you can find that recipe for scale, you now don't hit those same sort of diminishing returns. So it's a really nice accent to that cohort of channels you might have with Facebook and with Google. And then on the direct mail side of things, direct mail is like the new sexy. It's so funny the way it's come back, and everyone is just talking about it again. But if you think about it, its fundamentals is the types of sends that you're doing are based off real physical addresses. Not a pixel fire, so it's not being impeded there, but it's an actual address, which also means that you can power your targeting with really great machine learning to start building models of the types of individuals you should be sending to. So again, it's another channel that has a different sort of feedback loop that is outside of that realm was impacted on pixels currently. But the other beauty of it is with direct mail, you also have people that are really intent on being able to respond to a specific vanity URL or a specific offer code. So again, you're mitigating the risk of your portfolio by understanding that you can get different types of signals in different channels, and you can start really balancing things out in that way. Pause there. That was a long rant, but that's just where my POV is.
All good. I appreciate the response. A lot of education in your response. So really appreciate it. When I think about our industry, and I think about sort of every time there's a big shift in the space, I wonder how it impacts the different types of businesses in our industry. And here we are again, right? With a lot of privacy related changes going on, and curious to get your thoughts on the effect that these changes will have, on SMBs versus Fortune 500, let's just say.
For sure. So, it's at Square/Block. We are hyper focused on the business owner, that small to medium sized business. It's the reason why many of us actually came to work here. My dad's been a sole proprietor for his entire life. And I've understood the implications of what it means when a bank holds your funds for 3 days instead of getting instant access to that. And I've been able to have like that little first degree viewpoint of what that impact is on the day-to-day of the individual. So I think one of the bigger discussions we actually had when we were hearing the announcements of iOS 14.5 was like, what does this mean for small businesses globally? And I think the thing we need to be intellectually honest about is that these changes impact businesses of all sizes and industries in different ways. Like I said, at the top of our conversation, generally, like the broader your audience, the lower your media costs and the more granular it is, the more expensive it is. Well, that means disproportionately brands and companies that lean into products and offerings that have broad appeal and are able to buy on a much broader scale are going to be less impacted because they're not going to feel that same sort of degree of change with their targeting. Versus someone like, say, in gaming or direct to consumer from an e-commerce standpoint, where they are hyper targeted or dependent on a very specific signal, they are going to disproportionately feel that impact. And I think, your question about SMBs versus Fortune 500s, it's the same sort of thing where if you're Nike, if you're Procter & Gamble, if you're any large company and you see these changes coming, you have time to prepare. You have the luxury of probably being able to go out and hire the right person to fill a gap on your measurement team or on your creative team, or you're able to pay for a media mix modeling solution or stand up streaming, like I just talked about, which is not an inexpensive channel to go and stand up. And if you look at on the other side, and you're a local pizza shop here in San Francisco, your entire marketing budget might be advertising to people in your zip code on Facebook or on Google. And if all of a sudden half of those zip codes are no longer available and your audience is shrunk by 50%, like that's going to have a real impact on you. And you probably don't have the time or the headcount to be able to go and figure out what are other means for reaching those people that you no longer can reach. So definitely, there's going to be a disproportionate impact across industries, across business sizes. And I think that's something that we all need to keep top of mind as these changes continue to roll out.
Gotcha. And so at the top of this segment, we talked about sort of balancing data and creative as the main topic of discussion for this session, right? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so what it means to me as an individual is that I have a very odd background in that I come from a family of creatives. My dad is an artist, and I in no way have a creative bone in my body. But I've been exposed to it my entire life, and I've always been like the numbers and performance guy. So when my approach to performance marketing and what the changes that I'm seeing across the industry is this ability to balance data and creative and apply a data layer to your creative approach. So think about it in terms, again, of your risk mitigation plan. Right now, a bunch of changes to privacy. You need to rebalance your portfolio, and you still need to execute across optimizations for today. So that longer term solution is things like channel diversification. That takes a lot of effort. You can't just go and stand up streaming overnight or you do a direct mail send. I mean, that usually has a minimum of a 3-month lead time to print. You should be doing that. You should be thinking long-term about the next 2, 3, 4 quarters out of like, what are the channels you need to test into that balance out that portfolio? But in that near term, especially on like the performance side of things, like the tendency is to think about optimizations purely from an intra-platform publisher standpoint. I am changing my targeting. I am augmenting my bids, whatever it might be. But you're thinking about it from like that specific tactical lens. But the real lever that is almost never being pulled is understanding what specifically is inciting action from your core consumer and getting to that creative component that is inciting that action. You can do that by iterating on your creative at a more rapid pace. And, I like to think a lot of this as the late, great Virgil Abloh would talk about with his approach to fashion. And he was like, famously he was talking about like the rule of 3%. If you change something in its entirety, like the Jordans he was working on, it is a new product if you change something by just 3%. And I think like that is the type of lens that we need to have on the day-to-day. Like, rather than thinking about these changes, like how do I overhaul my approach to this or that? It's like, no, like how can I start rolling out tests that are slightly augmenting something, but giving me enough signal to understand if this is improving performance or decreasing performance, or this is improving lifetime value or not. And those are the types of things you need to start like iterating on and working out as muscle in that near term, because that is how you have like a balanced approach to growth over time.
So staying on that same note and theme, give us a real example of balancing data and creative.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something I'm super passionate about, and something that I kind of stumbled into in my time when I was working at Facebook. And when I was there, Facebook was an image first platform, which was awesome for a performance marketer, because you could go and take 1,000 images of something and you could throw it at the wall and 3 would work. And you're like, great. My sunk cost for the other 997 was a couple $100 or a couple thousand, whatever, but it's not going to ruin your overall CPA for the month if the vast majority of those things don't work. And then overnight, all of a sudden, it's a video first feed. Well, that's really intimidating to a performance marketer, because now you're talking about something that has a really high sunk cost and also gives you less variability of things to test. And you're looking at people that are spending $50, $100+ on a video shoot, and they got 1 or 2 assets to show for it. And if neither of those things work, well, then what? What have you learned? So I started working with a few of my buddies who had worked with Facebook, and they're on the agency side. Like, okay, like how do we start figuring out how to actually put a performance lens on video? And it starts by acknowledging the fact that like our current approach to video is kind of broken for performance, because again, you're looking at usually a couple assets, one 30-second spot versus another 30-second spot, and they're holistically different. From the scripting to the tonality to the lighting to, is it product first or is it in situ? There are 1,000 different variables at play. So even if one wins out, you don't know why it won out. And the bigger problem is that the one inherent truth of marketing is that everything hits ad fatigue. So then once that ad that you found no longer is performant, what do you then go back and replace it with? So what we started to do is, rather than shooting into a spot with one lens in mind and one 30-second like arc, what we do is we go and we basically build a content library of like 2 and 3, 4-second clips, and we shoot hundreds of them, where we would look at how to like capture every moment in time experiencing your brand or product, from looking at it online, discovering it online, to an unboxing moment of how you might be using it with your kids. We would shoot close-ups with hands versus the pan-outs of lifestyle. And what we did then is we nipped it in the bud in terms of like our upfront cost. And now we have all this super rich videography and like video assets where we can start stitching things together in post-production and actually isolate variables. Well, now we can look at like what happens when we change this end card to end card B. What happens when we open up on the product versus a family? What happens when we start looking at a 7-second versus a 10-second versus a 15-second versus a 20? And you can start understanding the specific part of the video that is inciting action. And this is exactly like what we are doing and building out here at Square. And we went from, when I joined, I think we were producing about a performance video every single year, to we are producing thousands of unique videos and testing them every single year. And it is a machine, and is with this idea of A's Moneyball baseball, where like I'm not looking for a home run of trying to understand like, how did I cut my performance costs by 50% with this one video versus the other video? What we're looking for is like, how do I find a 3% win rate on my intro? How do I stack that with a 5% win rate on my outro? How do I get like the bigger unlock of like, which value props should we be leaning into? Which order should we be speaking about those value props? Do people even care about seeing other people, or actually is it the product they care more about? And we lean into and only show product shots. Does that improve performance? And so we've built out these robust test and learn calendars, and we iterate and iterate and iterate. And it is just like one learning after another, where we keep stacking wins. And I think the most important part of this is the fact that it informs what we should be producing in our next shoot. Where now, like when we go back and we need to reshoot, we are no longer going into the production and being like, okay, guys, like what is it today? Do we shoot for a restaurant? Do we shoot for a lifestyle shot? Like, what do we do? We're like, we've got, for the most part, now a good formula. Like, people generally respond to like this type of videography with this duration and this end card. Cool. Now, what are the new tests we should deploy once we start getting those new shots in place? And this has been our single best defense against rising media costs, where we are seeing our Facebook CPMs do this like everybody else, but we're able to keep chipping away at those acquisition costs because every single week we're finding a way to decrease those initial acquisitions.
Love it, love it. Just a couple more questions before we bring Matt back in and get into some audience Q&A. So, I know you think about this as a performance marketer, right? With the sort of evolution of, again, identity, attribution, and measurement that's going on in our space, and what you just talked about from a testing perspective. I feel like as the industry continues to evolve, marketing has to obviously evolve with it. Therefore, the skills that you are looking for to hire for, to build out your team as a marketer are evolving too. Can you speak a little bit about sort of what you think about and how you go about hiring and building out a team today, knowing that, our space continues to evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. So the profile of an individual is completely changing. Again, we looked at like where we've been for the last 10 years, like digital marketing was easy to connect those dots. And I think a repercussion of that was that performance teams started hiring heavily on the quant side of things, and brand teams went heavily on the creative side of teams, and they became more and more siloed in most organizations. And now what we're seeing is those things are converging again. And all marketers across brand, content, performance, wherever they might sit within an organization, need to be able to think about the implications of the media that they're putting out and how they might be able to layer on a creative strategy to their targeting, and how that might marry and mimic what we're doing on the brand front and pulling people all the way through that funnel to make sure that they're getting that consistent type of messaging throughout. And I think the other big thing is looking at moving at a more agile pace and using marketing as your real-time focus group to update all parts of your brand's footprint, from your website to your content to whatever it might be. When we enter a new market, like we entered Ireland earlier this year, our PMMs are phenomenal, and they do all the upfront research around what is the total addressable market, who are the biggest competitors, like what are the biggest differentiators, and you have all these great hypotheses about like what's going to resonate. But then what's really awesome is when you start going in with like your brand strategy and performance strategy, you start testing this in real time. You're like, actually, people in Ireland are really responding to this, not that. Great. Now that we have that learning, let's go and update the landing page, and let's go and update the lead flow, and have that trickle through, and having that fully closed loop where people are working in tandem together, where it's not a content team in isolation and a brand team and a performance team in isolation. And that requires a different sort of skill set, both, again, being able to understand consumer psychology, to creative and data, and be able to measure everything, irregardless of what team you're on. But then also, too, those interpersonal skills, and be able to like work cross-functionally with others. Because again, this work is no longer happening heads down at a desk. It is, hey, this is what I'm doing and what I'm seeing. Like, are you seeing the same thing? Is there a way that these two things can be complementary? Like, and then start riffing that way. And I think it's fun because I think it's breaking down those barriers that have historically stood in a lot of organizations, and has been a great forcing function to allow people to start coming together and really understand why someone is buying their product or service, and then be able to use that to deliver on an even better experience for the core customer.
Yeah, I love your point about sort of the silos within an organization are coming down, and it's so true. If you are going to build a holistic strategy as it relates to, first party audience, it takes many different teams to do that. So love that point. All right, one last question before we bring Matt back in for some additional Q&A. Give us a marketing prediction for 2022.
Love these. So I'll go like a different route on this response. One of the things we observed over the last like 2 or 3 years with video is that there are a whole bunch of these social video agencies that popped up to bring down those barriers to entry, where it's no longer you need to go and spend $500,000 on a video shoot. Like you can churn it out for $50K for a shoot or $25K for a day, and allowing people, again, that lower barrier to entry so that more people could leverage these amazing platforms. And I think in 2022, what we're going to see with the emergence of streaming is that in many ways, streaming and remnant linear TV or whatever is treated very much as a still like high touch, incredibly expensive production when it doesn't need to be. And I think we're going to see a disruption at that agency level of people needing to scramble to figure out like, okay, like this is a channel that more and more and more brands are getting into and scaling in a real way, which also means with amazing scale comes increased burnout rates and needing to hit those advocates and refresh that creative. And I think what we're going to see is, and hopefully see, is this disruption of that agency model. See more agencies coming and figuring out like how to pull off excellent high touch productions with value, with initial upfront costs that aren't a hindrance to most to brands. So really open up that channel to be leveraged by more and more and more advertisers.
That's where that data and creativity comes into play, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Matt, welcome back. You're on mute, Matt.
Yeah, it's hilarious how wonderfully timed the Wi-Fi in the hotel knows when I'm 30 seconds from jumping back on, to then say, well, why don't we slow it down here on this guy. Great stuff. Josh, hopefully if you can, great stuff, Kerel, thank you. Two relatively quick questions, Josh. One, as a fellow son of an artist to another, one about your past, one about your present, both related. So since you were organizationally and probably literally in the same room with Zucker and Kerel at the Facebook, as you mentioned, and folks can see on your LinkedIn, what do you think is going to happen when it comes to identity attribution and measurement between the two of them and Timmy Cook? And what's the next move on the chessboard for each of them, would you say?
Well, I mean, I think all publishers are now kind of like digging in and putting up their own walls. And I think that's what we're going to see. And I think what we're going to need to lean into is this kind of like triangulation of measurement, where you're looking at your list studies that are happening within any publisher's channel. And then you're looking at informing your own MTA as well as like a third-party MMM. And how can you start informing your investment decisions based on that triangulation? Because again, your guess is as good as mine if, Mark and Timmy ever like make good, but like odds are they're probably going to stick with their current plan. I mean, we're already seeing.
Yeah, I mean, your guess is as good as ours. They're both incentivized in their DNA and by their shareholders to continue to crush each other and try to one up each other in terms of tagging and bagging, right?
Yeah, but at that point, I think what we're seeing is like some really cool stuff happening with emergence, like what the trade desk is doing and trying to figure out like their own modeling. Roku is working on some great stuff around their own identity attribution model. And I think what we're going to see is like a lot of these other companies coming up and converging together to try and help solve for this more like anonymized measurement problem, which I think is healthy for the industry to have more people helping out trying to solve for that.
Yep. In a related story, Square/Block obviously has some positioning with this little service called Apple Pay. Do you, given your remit leading global performance marketing, do you see a world where Block is leveraging purchase and intent behavior to appropriately and in an opt-in way better personalize marketing to power global marketers?
Yeah, so it's probably not something I can get like too deep into, but what I'd say is that we have a phenomenal marketing team here at Square. We have like a best-in-class analytics team that supports everything we do, from the brand team, from the content team, from the performance team. And I think like what we're really focused on too is ensuring that we are best equipped to adapt with changes in privacy, changes with legislation, and making sure that we are figuring out a path forward that makes sense for our media dollars, and that helps us grow to the scale that we want to grow. You know, and a lot of this, again, kind of like what I said at that top of the call, is we're all figuring this out together. And that means like retweaking those MTAs and asking colleagues of the companies about, like, you know, which other measurement solutions are they leaning into for MMM and things like that. And I think, you know, all marketing teams will have a long way to go in really honing that strategy and understanding how best to reach their core consumer. But I think that is where, you know, creative really comes to the top of this, is because I think we had that over reliance on signals. So it's like, great, just throw anything at anyone and hope that they click. And now it's pushing us as marketers to get smarter about why someone actually gives a damn about our product, and how does it help the end user. And, you know, I think about that with when I actually helped move my dad and his business over to a lot of Square's products. And I saw the pain points of not being able to send invoices in a timely manner, or huge fees that, you know, his credit card holders were charging him on top of his payments, to not getting access to his money when he needed to, like in real time. And understanding what is relevant and inciting action for consumers also helps then inform our business decisions of how to keep improving products, to make sure that we are showing up and providing real solutions that improve people's lives and improve people's businesses, because that is that flywheel over time. It doesn't matter how great your marketing is. You got to make sure that you're marketing something that people truly need, and how do you keep iterating on that?
Well said. So product launch, what, in 10 days? Did I hear something like that? No. Very nice. Well said as well, and thoughtful as always. Kerel, anything else for this esteemed guest?
No, that's all the questions that I had, and Josh, really appreciate you taking some time out and, like I said, providing some great insights and education.
You got it. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time.